So 2 years ago, I made a video trying to find the least popular Pokémon in the world. I used Google search data to do it. The Pokémon who were searched for most frequently were the most popular, and the ones who were almost never searched for must be the least popular, right? Except that's not quite true. The number one most searched Pokémon in the world is Pikachu. But while Pikachu is certainly the most well-known Pokémon, in terms of how liked, how popular he is, Pikachu actually comes in 65th place. But I'm jumping ahead a little. In order to truly find the most and least popular Pokémon, I put together a website where people could vote for which Pokémon they liked. Over the course of about a week, over 1.6 million votes were recorded. So in this video, I'll go through the results of the data. We'll take a look at the top and bottom of the list to discover which Pokémon are the most and least popular of all. Let's go! Part 1. The method. Right, so before we get to the ranking, we need to quickly walk through the method behind the madness. Earlier this year, I ran a similar project to find out which Animal Crossing villagers were the most popular. To do so, I created this voting website, which I coded myself from the ground up. And it worked. Mostly. The website crashed and glitched out a couple of times, so this time round, I wanted something a little more robust. And so, I worked together with a member of my Patreon community called Luke to rewrite the whole system from the ground up. I wrote the front-end code, which is the stuff you see when you visit the site, and Luke worked on the back end, which is the code that saves all of the votes to a database. Describing it like that makes our workloads sound fairly equal, but in truth, Luke put a huge amount of time into this website to ensure we didn't face the problems that my shoddy code led to last time round. Now, as for which Pokémon I included in the ranking, it's pretty simple. Every Pokémon with its own Pokédex number made it in. But to keep things simple, regional and gender variations without their own Pokédex ID were excluded. Still, that means we have 1,025 Pokémon in total to rank, which is no small number. And so, after the site was up and running, I sent out the link on YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, Discord, and more. And by a week or so later, over 1.6 million votes had been submitted, which is really incredible. Luke and I worked to organize all of that voting data. Actually, it was mainly Luke. And so now I have a nice ranked list of all 1,025 Pokémon, from least to most popular. I'll start with the least popular 20, and then we can move on to the most popular ones. Let's get ranking! Part 2. The bottom 20. 20th from the bottom is Gerda, the muscular Pokémon. Now, Gerda was introduced in Gen 5, which for the first time attempted to start fresh with a brand new set of Pokémon populating the game's Pokédex. Pokémon from previous games can only be found once you complete the story. And so, Game Freak had to design a huge number of new Pokémon, more than in any other generational leap. And while a lot of those Pokémon are great, and we'll be seeing a few in the top 20, there's also some that aren't quite so beloved, including Gerda. 19th from the bottom is Vullaby, who was introduced in Gen 5. Vullaby is known as the diapered Pokémon, and indeed appears to be wearing an eggshell as a diaper. I'm not sure that this idea was executed badly per se. I think it's just not a great idea in the first place. Next up, 18th from the bottom is Squawkabilly, one of a number of bird-like Pokémon. Squawkabilly was only recently introduced to the series in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, and it really fails to make much of an impact. There's a pretty large number of bird-like Pokémon, and Squawkabilly doesn't really do anything to set itself apart from the others. 17th on the list is Cascoon, a bug-type Pokémon from Gen 3. Now, Cascoon's design is really not very interesting. It evolves from Whirlpool, who is a perfectly fine caterpillar-like Pokémon, and it evolves into Dustox, who's a pretty cool moth or butterfly creature. But Cascoon is stuck in the middle. Heck, when its spikes retract, it literally looks like a ball with eyes. In 16th place, we have Crabominable. From a naming perspective, Crabominable is great, I think. But its unevolved form, Crabrawler, has a much more appealing character design. And while Crabominable's dual ice and fighting type is interesting, it doesn't really make for a strong fighter. 15th from the bottom is Basculin, the Gen 5 fish Pokémon. So Basculin is another unpopular Gen 5 Pokémon, and according to Pokémon designer Ken Sugimori, it was created because of a lack of fish in the Gen 5 Pokédex. But that lack of other fish means that when you go fishing in a puddle, lake, or the sea, Basculin is often all you end up with. And Basculin has no evolutions in Pokémon Black and White, although Pokémon Legends Arceus added Basculegion, who is undeniably pretty cool looking. In 14th place, we have Illumise, one of a pair of Firefly Pokémon. Illumise is the female counterpart to the male Volbeat, and to be frank, neither of these Pokémon is very liked. Illumise doesn't really resemble a Firefly at all, and its design is just nondescript all round. 13th from the bottom is Enamorus, one of the 4 Forces of Nature Pokémon. Originally, this was a trio introduced in Pokémon Black and White, but in Legends Arceus, a 4th Pokémon was added to the group, that being Enamorus. Sadly, Enamorus hasn't really been embraced in the same way as the other Forces of Nature. Perhaps that's due to Enamorus's overcomplicated and not especially appealing design. I mean, take a look at its Therian form. Scary. Next up, number 12 is Maschiff, a dog Pokémon introduced in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Being a Gen 9 Pokémon, Maschiff's not had a lot of time to enamor itself to Pokémon fans. And this dog Pokémon just doesn't do a whole lot to stand out either. It's a dog, and not much more. In 11th place, we have Volbeat, the male counterpart to Illumise, who we talked about a moment ago. Volbeat also doesn't really have much connection to its Firefly theme, and it has the less appealing design of the duo as well. And now we're down to the bottom 10 Pokémon. In 10th place is Frigibax, a dragon ice-type Pokémon introduced in Scarlet and Violet. Now, when you think of a dragon-type Pokémon, you picture Dragonite, Rayquaza, Pokémon with super cool-looking designs. But while Frigibax does eventually evolve into Baxcalibur, Frigibax itself has a really ugly-looking design. It's not exactly giving regal dragon vibes. Number 9 is Flittle, another bird-like Pokémon introduced in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Unlike Squawkabilly, which is based on a full-grown parrot, Flittle is based on a bird chick, which is fine, but this design is just quite bizarre. Is it a UFO, a chick, a frilly orb? That confusing form factor, combined with a slightly strange face, add up to an unpopular Pokémon overall. 8th from the bottom is Watchog, the Lookout Pokémon. In my previous video about unpopular Pokémon, I discovered that Watchog was the Pokémon who was searched for on Google the least often. In other words, this is a pretty forgettable Pokémon. And it seems, in terms of raw popularity too, this Gen 5 high-vis jacket-wearing rodent ranks right near the bottom. Up next, number 7 is Blipbug, the lava Pokémon. I think in the context of Blipbug's evolutionary line, this Pokémon's design is actually quite interesting. But if you take Blipbug on its own, well, it just doesn't look very appealing. Plus, Blipbug's role as a very basic early game Pokémon means it often gets forgotten once players evolve it into a Dottler or Orbeetle. In 6th place is Capsakid, a Gen 9 Pokémon based on spicy peppers. And that's a great name. Capsaicin is the name of the chemical found in chili peppers, which makes them taste spicy. But that spicy pepper theme just doesn't come through at all in the design. Capsakid just looks odd, and might be too new to really have made a deep impression on players. 5th from the bottom is Smoochum, the kissing-themed Pokémon from Gen 2. Smoochum is kind of a weird-themed Pokémon. I'm not sure what prompted Game Freak to create a baby-faced Pokémon that just loves to kiss. Plus, Smoochum is the baby pre-evolution of Jinx, who has famously been embroiled in controversy over the years. Smoochum's weird design, combined with its association with Jinx, have netted it a ranking of 5th from the bottom. The 4th least popular Pokémon is Monkey-Dory. Now, Monkey-Dory was introduced in the Teal Mask DLC for Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, which makes this Pokémon one of the most recently added on the list. Its design, a combination of monkey-like features and poison typing, clearly didn't quite resonate with fans who played the DLC, and for those who didn't, well, they just don't know who this guy is. 3rd on the list is Binacle, the two-handed Pokémon from Gen 6. This Pokémon is just so weird looking. It's apparently based on goose barnacles, but these things look more like claws with faces on them to me. And the fact that there's 2 of these barnacles sprouting from a rock, I really can't imagine what the designers of this Pokémon were going for, but the final result is really visually off-putting. 2nd from the bottom is Bruxish, a very weird-looking fish Pokémon from Sun and Moon. Bruxish is widely disliked for its unsettling design. Its exaggerated, colourful fish face and sharp teeth come across more creepy than cute. This Pokémon is apparently based on the reef triggerfish, which is the state fish of Hawaii. But while the real-life version of this fish looks pretty cool, the Pokémonified version just looks unappealing. Finally, the least popular Pokémon of all is Rellor. Rellor is a dung beetle Pokémon who was introduced in Gen 9. And I feel like that covers a lot of why this Pokémon ranked at the very bottom of the list. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet were controversial games to say the least, so a lot of Gen 9 Pokémon ranked fairly low down. But putting that aside, the concept of a dung beetle Pokémon is obviously not super appealing. Rellor's design is somehow ugly, but also much less memorable than other Pokémon like Bruxish. So there we have the bottom 20 Pokémon of the list. Now, let's go through the top 20 most popular Pokémon. Part 3, the top 20. In 20th place, we have Cyndaquil, the Gen 2 starter. Cyndaquil's design is cute, but that fiery blaze gives it a bit of an edge. It evolves into Typhlosion, who is powerful and has absolutely nothing else worth noting about. And Cyndaquil returned as a starter in Legends Arceus more recently too. In 19th, we have Rowlet, another starter Pokémon, this time from Gen 7. Generally, the more recently introduced starter Pokémon don't come close to the popularity enjoyed by, say, Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. But Rowlet's very cute character design propelled it forward to an unusual level of popularity. Number 18 is Luxray. This Pokémon was introduced in Gen 4, and it combines the cute element seen in Rowlet and Cyndaquil with more of a dark edge. I think it's because it manages to bridge the gap between cute and cool that this sleek-looking Pokémon appeals to a wide range of people. In 17th place, we have the mysterious trickster, Gengar. Introduced in Gen 1, Gengar feels like a true Pokémon mainstay. Again, he balances cute with more of a mischievous, darker side. Gengar has enjoyed numerous appearances in the anime, the games, even the Detective Pikachu movie. In 16th place, we have a truly iconic Pokémon, Mewtwo. The very first Pokémon anime movie was all about Mewtwo's dark and tragic backstory. And in the first generation of Pokémon games, Mewtwo was the strongest Pokémon there was. And multiple decades later, Mewtwo still stands out among every other Pokémon. Number 15 is Lapras, who's also been around since Gen 1. Lapras was a real workhorse, allowing players to surf their way across Kanto's waters. This Pokémon has a friendly-looking face and appeared frequently in the heyday of the Pokémon anime. What's not to like? 14th is Kyogre, the Gen 3 legendary Pokémon. Kyogre appears on the game boxes for Pokémon Sapphire and Alpha Sapphire, and just looks plain cool. All of Gen 3's super ancient legendaries are pretty darn popular, so make a mental note of that. In 13th is Mudkip, a beloved Gen 3 starter. I think that Mudkip has one of the cutest Pokémon designs. But don't let its friendly exterior fool you, as Mudkip eventually evolves into Swampert, who can be a formidable opponent in battle. Oh, and in the mid-2000s, Mudkip was famously made into a meme, which was very widespread at the time. 12th on the list is Leafeon, our first, but not last, evolution in the top 20. Without spoiling the rest of the list too much, all of Eevee's various evolutions are extremely popular with fans. Leafeon, in particular, offers a planty take on Eevee's design. Nice. In 11th place is Lugia, a legendary from Gen 2. Like Mewtwo, Lugia had a movie all about them, which is how you know they're important. It's the mascot of 3 different Pokémon games, Silver, Soul Silver, and also Pokémon XD, Gale of Darkness. Lugia is a majestic and iconic legendary to this day. And that brings us to the top 10. In 10th place is Espeon, another evolution. Espeon was introduced in Gen 2 as one of 2 new evolutions, and brings a sleek, mysterious, and super cool looking vibe to the Eevee family. Plus, Espeon has a major role in Pokémon Colosseum, which just helps to propel this Pokémon into the top 10. In 9th place, we have Mew, the original mystery of the Pokémon series. Gen 1 was advertised as having 150 different Pokémon, but in truth, an extra 151st Pokémon was sitting in the game's files, that being Mew. Initially, this Pokémon was only available at limited time real-life Pokémon events, but this secrecy led to all manner of rumors and playground legends about how to obtain Mew, the 151st Pokémon. Without Mew, those original Pokémon games might not have become as big a phenomenon as they did. 8th on the list is Chandelure, a unique-looking Pokémon which debuted in Gen 5. The reason for Chandelure's popularity is undoubtedly its super cool character design. The idea of a Pokémon based on a haunted chandelier sounds a little strange, but in execution, it just works so well. Chandelure's not a starter, it's not a legendary, it's just got a great design. In 7th, we have Lucario. Lucario is perhaps most famous for its role as a fighter in the Super Smash Bros. Series. Lucario has also had prominent appearances in the Pokémon anime and the film series, where Lucario gets a film of its own, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. Just a super iconic and recognizable Pokémon all round. Next up, 6th is Rayquaza, another Gen 3 super ancient legendary alongside Kyogre, who ranked 14th, and Groudon, who was a lot lower down the ranking at 105th. So what makes Rayquaza in particular the most popular of the trio? Well, Rayquaza has a super cool serpentine design for a start. Serpents are just pretty cool. Plus, as the third of the legendaries, Rayquaza is the mascot for Pokémon Emerald, a really beloved Pokémon game. In 5th place, we have Vaporeon, our third evolution of the list. Vaporeon was one of the 3 original evolutions, having been introduced way back in Gen 1. That gives this Pokémon a real nostalgic value for players, and combined with Vaporeon's simple yet elegant design, Vaporeon landed in 5th place. 4th on the list is not an evolution, but rather Eevee itself. Eevee has long been a fan favourite Pokémon, particularly in Japan, and in recent years the Pokémon Company has sought to leverage that popularity to turn Eevee from just a popular Pokémon into a mascot on the level of Pikachu. Case in point, Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Eevee can evolve into 8 different Pokémon, which gives Eevee a real level of adaptability too. In 3rd place, we have Sylveon, the most recent evolution, who was introduced in Generation 6. With Pokémon X and Y, Game Freak introduced Fairy type, the first new type since Gen 2. And with it, they created Sylveon, a Fairy type evolution. Sylveon has a cute pastel colour palette and cute design, but also packs a punch in battle. In 2nd place, the runner-up is Mimikyu. In the years since its introduction, Mimikyu has become extremely iconic within the Pokémon fandom. The tragic tale of a Pokémon so scary looking that it disguises itself as Pikachu in an attempt to be loved. What doesn't resonate about that? And with the addition of an extremely catchy song, Mimikyu has shown that the best way to rival Pikachu's popularity is to become a literal knockoff of Pikachu. And it works! You can't help but love poor old Mimikyu. And finally, in 1st place, the most popular Pokémon of all is Umbreon. When Umbreon was first introduced in Gen 2, the Dark type was brand new with only 6 Pokémon of this type in the game. Umbreon was the first pure Dark type Pokémon, and the only Dark type evolution. And that comes through in Umbreon's design, which combines coolness with cuteness in a way that just appeals to a lot of different types of players. Umbreon has had major appearances in the Pokémon TV anime as the partner of Gary Oak and also Gladion. Plus, Umbreon is one of the first Pokémon you get in Pokémon Colosseum. With its cool design and its frequent appearances in all kinds of Pokémon media, it's no surprise that Umbreon came out on top, with an astonishingly high win rate of 79.5%. That means that for every 5 times Umbreon was shown to users, it won 4 times. Wow. So there we have it, the most and least popular Pokémon in the world. I've only covered 40 Pokémon in this video. To see the full list, you can go to thomasgamedocs.com/Pokémon. Check out where your favourite Pokémon ended up. But before you click off, if you weren't able to take part in the voting, worry not. I've got a survey out right now about the most and least popular Pokémon games. There's 21 games in total to rank, and you can also write up to 5 words giving your opinion about each game. In a few days, I'll close the survey and put together a video covering every Pokémon game from least to most popular. So if you want to take part in the upcoming video, act now! The link is in the description. A huge thanks to my patron Luke for providing so much help on the voting website. Without him, I'm not sure this project could have happened. And a special thanks to my patrons. This type of high-effort, time-consuming video is only possible because of your kind support. In particular, a special shout-out goes to Alison Withernall, Brett and Eric, Candy Crystal, Cyprian Eov, Daryl Jero, Ellie Birnbaum, Evan Kinney, Hi There and Bye, J.E., Jim Gilsonan, Kieran Chan, Kelly Wright, Lucas Little, Michael Gunter, Skater Pie, and Thomas Söderlund.